Hi, welcome to another edition of Jazz Smack. And tonight we are going to talk about the two really big wins, in my opinion, the two biggest wins of the season thus far in back-to-back games at home against Detroit, on the road against San Antonio. And we are going to talk about those two big wins, plus where do the Jazz stand right now in terms of some of the offensive numbers, in terms of pace of play, points per game, assists per game, and where do they rank among other NBA teams? And do those rankings mean anything meaningful compared to what we would see, in a comparative standpoint against the other NBA teams? So let's talk about all of that and much more.
Jazz Smack, NBA and Utah Jazz basketball.
So in my opinion, those were the two best wins of the season thus far. Taking down the Detroit team at home, huge win, going on the road and taking on a surging San Antonio Spurs team where Victor actually started again. The only person they were really missing of note was De'Aaron Fox. That's still a really big win. So those two wins are really impressive. And I think if we take a look at the box score of that San Antonio Spurs game, there are a couple of guys I want to point out that weren't the starters, that were not the starters. But Cody Williams, the names are a little bit cut off here on the screen, but Cody Williams and Walter Clayton Jr., those two guys played two of the best games that they've ever played in the NBA, and I'm not sure the Utah Jazz win this game without those guys playing so well. I mean, it was truly impressive. Walt went 6 for 6 from the field. He gets 5 assists, no turnovers, scored 17 points. He's a plus 22 for the game in 22 minutes. Truly awesome numbers. And then Cody goes 4 for 8 from the field, 6 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 steal. And he scores 8 points and is a plus 10 for the game. Those two guys were phenomenal. That's a first-year rookie player and a second-year player. Two guys that have, up to this point, have received very spotty minutes, and they came up huge.
I'll point out one thing with Cody Williams. He went up against Wembanyama, tried to dunk it over him, and got blocked. But where I point that out, like, okay, he missed the shot. But what I really liked about the play is Cody Williams has been criticized, legitimately so, for not being aggressive. Kind of being invisible for a whole half. He even did that in the Summer League, where the second half he'd look really good. The first half he'd be invisible. And he wasn't in that game. I mean, he was aggressive. So whatever has happened to him, and hopefully it's a continuation, he looked better. And so I agree with that. But I'd also say this about, and this is kind of over both the games, is that Keontae's looked better. In this game, he was a plus minus 2. And I think over the last 2 to 3, 4 games, his plus minus has not been as bad. So, like in this game, it's plus 18. And honestly, it's hard to look game to game, because things can happen. You still got to look over the season, and we will look again for our whole team, maybe 5 or 10 games from now to see how they're doing. But he's looked better. The challenge, I think, with Keontae, and we've never been the biggest Keontae fans, and we'll be very upfront about that. But the biggest challenge with Keontae is, in modern NBA, you've got to play both sides. You got to play defense too. In his first 2 seasons, he didn't. And honestly, in this season, he really hasn't either. So that's been kind of thrown under the rug. But I feel like his efficiency has gone way up. He's able to create his own shot. And he's struggling. He's trying more on defense, and he's not turning the ball over as well. So I want to give him his props because he's looked better. Honestly, he's looked better. And some of these wins, I think you have to attribute to not only Lowry, but Keontae too. And he should get credit for that.
And the team overall in this particular game in San Antonio, they shot the ball really well. I mean, the Jazz shot, really well from 3, really, really well from the field overall. I mean, it was really an impressive showing. They didn't turn the ball over. They had 34 assists, only 15 turnovers. Those are truly impressive numbers. Better than 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio for a game is great. And so let's take a look at some of those numbers, some of those offensive numbers for the team as a whole. Now, the Jazz, a lot of has been talked about pace of play, and the Jazz right now are third in the league in pace of play, which means the number of average possessions per 48 minutes. And right now, the Jazz are third at 103.04 possessions per 48 minutes. The Miami Heat are number one at 104.67. So the Jazz are really good at pushing the pace, and under Will Hardy, they have done that. The interesting thing about that, though, is if you look at these top teams in pace of play this season, it hasn't really created a lot of wins, because if you look at the top 12, there are no good teams so far this season in pace of play, which is really interesting. So the teams that are actually pushing it the most are really struggling. I mean, you have like Cleveland's having a really rough year. They're 17-16 on the season so far, and they are 8th in pace of play. Washington Wizards at 7th, Dallas at 6th, Portland at 5, Atlanta at 4, Chicago at 2, Miami at 1. You don't, until you get down to the Detroit Pistons at 13th, then OKC at 14th, do you really have good teams on this list. So far this season, that pace of play number, the guys that are really pushing it hasn't translated to success, which is an interesting point. But I love the assist numbers. The Jazz are killing it in assists right now. And if you just look at the points per game, the Jazz are tied for third with New York in points per game. But then if you look at the assists, they're second in assists to Atlanta at 30.3, and Atlanta's 31. And sharing the ball, I think, is a terrific thing. We know the Jazz have turned the ball over a lot, but they are racking up a ton of assists as well, in the midst of all those turnovers.
And just one point on that, and then I'd like to go back to the pace of play. Just one point on that is that in watching that San Antonio game, there were players that were passing up shots. I go back to Keontae again. He had a shot on the wing at the three-point line. He passed it to the corner. So something is resonating with him. I don't know if it's Will Hardy, his maturation, or whatever. That actually is something we want to see. And so it is really encouraging. You and I both really like that. And I do think that's something Will Hardy should get big credit for. There's a lot of things he should be openly criticized for, but that is something he should get credit for. And I think we want our team to be able to do that. Now, pace of play is an interesting one, because Miami this year, Spoelstra came out and said he changed his offensive philosophy. So they're number one in pace of play, and they actually are a decent record, 17-15. And I would say that's a decent record given their talent level, which I think is, suspect. I think some of the players on their team get more credit for being good than they really should. So, I think is a success story with Miami, but the rest of them are very interesting. And as you said, boy, I'm glad we're not dealing with the Don situation at Cleveland. So what a disaster. But given that we own draft picks, that's a great thing for us. Same with Minnesota, right? The more they struggle, the more they go through turmoil, the more potentially it's good for us down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we should all be watching those two teams and actually hoping for losses, because that does help the Jazz over the next few years. Certainly, those pick swaps with those two teams could turn into something. I mean, those could turn into gold. So that's a really, really big positive that both those teams are struggling. And if Cleveland decides to move Mitchell, which is obviously a possibility if they continue to struggle, that's a positive for the Utah Jazz without question.
And just talking about those draft picks, we were hoping that they would all turn into gold. The ones that were most likely to turn into gold were the ones that were far off, right? That always was the case. San Antonio did a better job with Atlanta turning their picks into gold, for some of their trades right away. But that was always the goal with Minnesota and Cleveland is the picks down the line, is you hope the team kind of fizzles and breaks apart by that time. It happened with Clippers in Oklahoma City too. So we're still hopeful. Let's hope we it turns into something. So there's turmoil there. But that's all I have on that.
Well, why don't you talk about the tanking numbers then that we mentioned on the last podcast, and what the NBA is thinking about doing in terms of fixing the tanking situation.
And let me say this: the only thing that I'm going to talk about is what has been leaked. So we have no idea the whole list of things that are talked about as possible solutions to tanking. There have been a number of good articles that I've read over the last few years of 15 different ways to affect tanking. Now, it's interesting, before I get into them, I was listening to another commentator about the Utah Jazz, and his position is that Silver should do nothing, that it's actually okay that teams are losing, and that's just the way it should be. And I got to tell you, there's two of us on this podcast that feel that's absolutely wrong. We actually do want teams to get higher draft picks. We want higher draft picks, but in no sense should teams ever be motivated to lose basketball games. That's not good for the league. It's not good for competitive balance. And it's not fair to fans for the amount that you're paid now. Wow. So look about the three things that were leaked. And one is, I wouldn't even say it's the anti-tag. It's limiting pick protections to either the top 4 or 14 or higher. So to eliminate the problematic mid-lottery protections, I think that's the deal with the situation like with Philadelphia, even what the Jazz have right now with the top 8 protected, is that teams that are within that range not to be motivated to lose, just to keep that pick. Like, so for the Jazz right now, where we're in the 10th spot, where we may say, look, we've got to really lose a couple games to drop down to the 8th. I guess that's what they're trying to do. But frankly, I don't think that's much of a solution at all. That is not an anti-tanking position to me. Like, what do you think about that?
No, it's terrible. That is not the answer to this problem. That doesn't even begin to address this problem in a meaningful way. I mean, it's just stupid. They've got to come up with something better than that.
Yeah, hopefully that's not their solution, because that is not, honestly, like I said, some of these articles are really good on all these creative ways to improve it, to eliminating, just make it even odds, whatever, which is not frankly a bad, or, even odds, but then if you've got a top pick, you don't get it again. So the next one on the list is that you can't pick in the top 4 2 years in a row. And frankly, I read that one and I'm like, okay, so if you didn't pick in the top 4, then you're going to be very motivated to tank and be terrible that year. But if you did pick in the top 4, then you probably are still motivated, because everyone knows a 5th or 6th or 7th pick is still good. So you can't get the top 4. Like, I don't really get how that solves anything. What we're trying to do is get teams not to lose. And the Jazz were the worst record in the league last year, and we got the number 5, and we were all disappointed. But honestly, we are still very happy with the number 5. So I don't get that one either. So what are your thoughts on that?
No, they need to come up with a solution so there is no incentive to lose. Period. For any year. Like, that has to be the key. If there's at least limited incentive to lose. Like, you just got to remove that from the equation. If there's incentive to lose, there's going to be teams trying to lose. And that's what the NBA has to address. We want players to play more games instead of sitting, and you don't want to be in a situation where fans are sitting through teams that are purposely losing. And I don't care if they lost the previous season or not. You just got to remove that out of the equation, so that there has to be a solution that addresses this for all teams every year.
So let me go to the last one. So the last one is that the lottery positions are locked after March 1st. So that one means that you may tank until March 1st, but after March 1st, you're motivated to win and you're not going to throw away the last part of the season. And we do know that that last 25% of the season, there are a lot of teams that just shut everybody down on purpose. So I get trying to eliminate that from happening, but it's not going to do anything about tanking up to March 1st. And in fact, teams are going to be more motivated to tank up to March 1st. So again, I have no idea what kind of a solution is that to solve this problem, because I don't see it like right now, and then I'll let you comment on it. Right now we have Indiana Pacers at 6 wins. They're tanking. Washington Wizards at 7 wins. They're tanking. New Orleans at 8 wins. They don't own their pick, so they're not tanking. Sacramento Kings at 8 wins. They're tanking. Clippers at 9. They're not tanking because they don't own their pick, etc. So we have 3 teams in there that are tanking right now, and that March 1st would do absolutely nothing towards that.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of these teams, all 30 teams may go into the season and try to win games, but 15 games into it, you know where you stand in terms of being able to be competitive. You're not going to start off like Indiana did and get to game 20 and say, yeah, we think we have a pretty good shot still. No, that's not going to happen. So they're just going to tank from the get-go. They're going to just start it earlier. That too is not a solution. So Adam Silver has to do better than this. If these are legitimate ideas that are coming out of the NBA front office, he has to do better than this. Bottom line.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a ton of confidence in Silver. I have about as much confidence as I do in Will. So, I don't. I hope it's going to be better, because that's not going to solve anything. And then 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about the same thing. How do we eliminate tanking? Because his solution solved absolutely nothing. And I do think, honestly, where you say that NBA owners don't want to solve this problem, I honestly don't believe that. I think NBA owners that are poor want to get better. And there's a way, but I think that owners want to have like teams that are intentionally not winning, so fewer people come to the games, et cetera. I don't believe that that's true. So I don't think that this is like, oh, the NBA owners are trying to block real reforms. I don't buy that. Why would they? The reality is, why would they? Like if you really want like a tanking where losing leads to a top pick, then you would just like do it as the worst record gets the top pick, right? I mean, as it was at a point in time, because that would encourage like, okay, I'm terrible, I'm just going to lose every game and I know I'm going to get the top pick, right? So I don't think it's an issue. It's like David, Silver's best ideas, and I hope there's better ideas. He's just not telling us.
Yeah, there's certainly. I mean, I would be shocked if these were the implemented strategies by the NBA, and this has been going on a long time. I mean, let's face it, this isn't like a new thing. People have been talking about this for years. It's just to the point where, so many players aren't playing anymore, and all these other factors that have just, kind of mushroomed. And so it's become even a greater problem than it was in years past. So yes, the NBA has to, these 3 ideas aren't the solution. Adam Silver has to come up with something better than this. So we'll see what happens. One other thing I wanted to mention, something else that came up was that and this doesn't apply necessarily to the NBA, although it certainly has ties to the NBA. There's some guy who was drafted by the NBA and played in the NBA who's now being recruited to college basketball. I mean, what is going on? I mean, this is insane. playing professional basketball and then going back and playing professional basketball in the NBA and then going back and having college eligibility, that is nuts. Like, is CJ Miles going to come out of retirement because he never went to college and now go get an NIL deal because he's not getting paid anymore? I mean, that's the level of crap we're dealing with now. I mean, this is crazy, absolutely crazy. Something needs to be done. And this doesn't necessarily apply to the NBA, but something has to be done at the college level because this is just dumb.
Yeah, I heard that too. I didn't really read it. The other news story I would bring up, and you know, you and I don't watch a ton of football, but I think the Kyle Whittingham move to Michigan is really interesting, and I'm rooting for the guy. I think it's incredibly hard to win at the Utah schools. You know, they don't have the money, they don't have the prestige to recruit guys in, and so to win a national championship, I think is really hard. So I'm rooting for the guy. I hope he goes to Michigan, and now with their buckets of money, et cetera, he wins. Not that I'm going to watch any more football because I watch very little now, but I'm rooting for the guy. And I always felt like in Utah, it was an uphill battle for him. I do hope whoever steps in, whoever they've appointed, I don't know, named, is going to do a great job, because I think Kyle's done a great job at the University of Utah, given the limitations I think they have there.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly... He'll be able to, he's in a position now where he can, I mean, if he doesn't succeed at the national level in Michigan, then, that'll display how good of a coach he actually is. He had a great run at University of Utah for sure. And will that translate over to the University of Michigan? Who knows? There's been some things that have gone on at that university that are real head scratchers, and certainly one of the things that he's known for being a really clean cut guy, clean cut program, and all the issues that university has had recently. He'll go in there. You're not going to have all those off the field issues and all that stuff. All that garbage is going to be eliminated under Whittingham for sure, and that. I think that Michigan needs that right now, especially considering their basketball program. I mean, they're in line to compete for a Final Four this year, and their basketball program certainly, under Dusty May is doing really well. So, yeah, I think that's exciting news for him, and hopefully he has success there.
And you made this comment, and I'll end on this, is that Harbaugh won. He won the national championship. Harbaugh never plays clean. And so I do hope that Whittingham is able to win, and I hope he's able to win clean, because we know that's how he manages his program. The question is, can you win in college football or college basketball by playing clean? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, because Harbaugh will bend any rule that they can, and he won, right? But they're he is not one that look at all the things that he left behind. At that program. I mean, he a very interesting character. So I'm rooting for Whittingham, though. And as you said, I don't know if he's a good coach, right? I don't know. I think he did a good job at Utah, but is he going to be able to get over the top and win it all? I don't know.
Yeah, and for those of you out there, I mean, you have you have one really good story about Harbaugh in a Chicago bar with James, and one of the sleaziest things I've ever heard anybody doing to another person, and that was all Jim Harbaugh. Just that was one of the scummiest things I've ever heard a person do. Just gross. But anyway, agreed. But anyway. So I think that we will call it a night with that, and we will talk to everybody again in the coming days. But anyway, for those watching on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. You can also follow us on X at JazzSpac, and we will talk to everybody later.